Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic podcast. This is my first video where I basically prove why Islam is true. Inshallah, I'll create a series of videos where I'll give all the evidences and the arguments as to why Islam is the true religion, starting with why Quran is the word of God. So in this video, I'm going to discuss the prophecy of the war between the Romans and the Persians. For example, just to give you guys some context, Abu Zakaria, in his book, The Forbidden Prophecies, he writes the following. The Byzantine and the Persian Empire were two leading superpowers in the 7th century. In the year 602 CE, the world watched on as they went to all-out war. From the beginning, the Persian war machine overwhelmed the Byzantines, who were facing internal rebellion and thus were at a disadvantage. After a series of devastating losses, the Byzantines couldn't stop the Persian onslaught. The unthinkable happened. The city of Jerusalem, which was the heart of Christianity, was captured and desecrated by the Persians. The true cross, a relic which Christians believe was the actual cross that Jesus was crucified on, was stolen and taken back to Persia. The Byzantines were Christians, and the loss of Jerusalem was a major psychological blow for them. The war between the two empires was not just a purely political or economically motivated one. There was religious element to it. The world one in which Christianity and Zoroastrianism were opposed to one another. This great loss of the Byzantine Christians to the Persians made the idol worshippers of Arabia happy, and they used this incident to mock Muslims. By the way, this is actually a true thing. This is mentioned in Ibn Kathir's tafsir. However, it is in this context that the following verses were revealed.
غلبت الروم في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون في بضع سنين لله الأمر من قبل ومن بعد وَيَوْمَئِذٍ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ.
The Byzantines have been defeated in the nearest land, but they, after their defeat, will overcome within a few years. To Allah belongs to command before and after, and that day the believers will rejoice. You can read about this in Quran 30, 2-4. So this verse clearly prophesies that even though the Byzantines have lost a lot of land and is losing the war, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that but after their defeat they will overcome or start winning the war within a few years. However, Persian conquest continued and they went on to defeat the Byzantines in Egypt and take over that province. As the Byzantines conceded territory, they lost much needed tax revenues. And to add to their misery, a plague broke out in 690 CE, which further damaged their tax revenue. After conquering Egypt, the Persian Emperor Khosrow sent Heraclius the following letter. And this is what Khosrow, the king of Persia, or emperor of Persia, wrote to Heraclius, who was the king of the Romans. Khosrow, greatest of gods and master of the earth, to Heraclius, his vile and insensate slave. Why do you still refuse to submit to our rule and call yourself a king? Have I not destroyed the Greeks? You say that you trust in your God. Why has he not delivered you out of my hand? Caesar, which means Caesar, I'm guessing. Jerusalem and Alexandria? And shall I not also destroy Constantinople? But I will pardon your faults if you submit to me. And come hither and your wife and children, and I will give you lands, vineyard, and olive groves, and look upon you with a kindly aspect. Do not deceive yourself with vain hope in that Christ, who was not able to save himself from the Jews, who killed him by nailing him to a cross. Even if you take refuge in the depths of the sea, I will stretch out my hand and take you, whether you will or not. So basically this is like a extremely humiliating kind of like letter, and you can read about this in Heraclius, Emperor of Byzantium, page 88, by Walter Emil Kaegi. You can also read about this in Europe, A History, page 245 by Norman Davis. Now, however, despite all odds, the Byzantines actually started fighting back, and they actually started winning. And this shocked everybody. For example, on March 25, 624, Heraclius left Constantinople to attack the Persian heartland. He willingly abandoned any attempt to secure his rear or his communication with the sea, marching through Armenia and modern Azerbaijan to assault the core Persian lands directly. You can read about this in A Short History of Byzantium by John Julius Norwich. Now, according to Walter Kaegi, Heraclius led an army of no more than 40,000 and most likely between 20,000 to 24,000. Before journeying to the Caucasus, he recovered Cassaderia. These are lands that was lost to the Persians, Caesarea and Cappadocia, in defiance of the earlier letter that Khosrow had sent him. Heraclius advanced along the Arxis River, destroying Persian-held Divin, the capital of Armenia, and Nakivian at Ganzaka. Heraclius met Khosrow's army, some 40,000 strong. Using loyal Arabs, he captured and killed some of Khosrow's guards, leading to the disintegration of the Persian army. Heraclius then destroyed Adur Gunshap, the famous Zoroastrian fire temple at Takht-i-Suleiman. Heraclius then went on to pretty much win the war and win back the supposed true cross. So, in case you guys don't know, this Takht-i-Suleiman is a huge fire worshipping temple, and I think you can still see its ruins or its remnants in Iran, I think. So that's the temple that Heraclius destroyed. And so, yeah, he basically started winning and ended up actually winning the war and getting back this supposed true cross. So how did this happen, right? How does, a nation or a king who almost seemed like they have no hope of winning, all of a sudden started winning? This is almost like a miraculous victory. And this is the type of stuff that you read in like novels and fantasy stories, right? But that's exactly what happened. Now, so as you guys can clearly see, what the Quran said came true. Now, reasons why this Quran making this prediction doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to explain why. So, for example, if you're someone who's skeptical of Islam or don't think that Islam is true, there can be a few possibilities, right? One could be that the Quran is just a man-made book. But here are a few reasons why that doesn't make any sense, right? For example, number one would be, if Prophet Muhammad was a fraud and he was writing the Quran, then he would never risk being wrong, because that could mean his death. I mean, think about it. Imagine he's just making up this religion, right? And he has this holy book. And in this holy book, he makes a prediction. But it's a very risky prediction. Why would he do that? Why would he say that, a country that seems like that have no hope of winning is all of a sudden gonna win? That doesn't make any sense. That's an extremely risky bet. And no one would take that kind of risk, especially a fraud. So, from this point of view, it doesn't make any sense. So we can cross this off the bucket list, because it makes it very, 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 very unlikely that Prophet Muhammad SAW was actually making up the Quran. Then the number two is that the much safer bet was Persia, not Rome, in any way, as they were losing the war, and which is true. Because if you look at the situation, it could have been much easier for the Quran to say that, the Persia is gonna win. Obviously, the Quran would be wrong, but the Quran didn't do that. The Quran did the opposite, right? Instead of going with the most safer bet, the Quran went with the one that is the most unlikely, which again shows that if this was a man-made book, it is very unlikely that people would, pick Rome over Persia. a country that's losing the war. So again, it doesn't make any sense. Then number 3 is that the best solution would be to just stay quiet, and that's the thing. Like if the Prophet was a fraud and Quran was not a word of God, the best option for them is to just be quiet and don't say anything. And yet the Quran went out of its way to make a prediction, and not only did it make a prediction, it made a very unlikely prediction, and that unlikely prediction came true. So all of this, when you combine all of this, it makes it much more likely that the Quran is not some man-made book. The only option that makes the most sense is that this prediction came from God himself, not from any man, as he would be the only one who would actually know the future, because any normal person wouldn't take risks like this. Based on this, I think we can make a very good argument, which is the following. Premise 1. If the Quran predicted the future despite odds, then it's very likely to be the word of God. Premise 2. The Quran did predict the future despite the odds. Conclusion. Therefore, it's very likely that the Quran is the word of God. And this is why it's very likely that the Quran is the word of God. Some idiot Islamophobes try to make the argument in response to this type of kind of like historical argument is that but the Muslim sources cannot be trusted, blah blah. I find this type of like objections really hilarious, because they're assuming that some guy just came amidst the Muslims who have all memorized the Quran and somehow just added this story later on and no one noticed. Like it makes no sense. So this is like a conspiracy theory level arguments, which doesn't make any sense, because if you say that this is maybe a later edition, that some guy just came in and just added this story, that will never work. Do you know why that will never work? Because the Quran was memorized by almost everyone, okay? Whether it's Abu Bakr, Ali, Zaid bin Thabit, Omar, most of these people have memorized the Quran in its entirety. The moment these verses were revealed, they memorized it. Okay, so it's literally impossible for anyone to add like this type of new stories and without anyone noticing it. It's just not possible. Okay, and Uthman radiallahu anhu already codified this, and I have a video on this channel where I talked about the history of how the Quran was compiled, and this is absolutely impossible that someone would just later on come in and just add this story. It's not possible. It's absolutely impossible. And also we have manuscripts from that time period, along with the written history of how the Quran was compiled and the people that memorized the Quran from the Prophet directly. And there are so many people that memorize the Quran in its entirety that it's impossible for anyone to just add anything later on. And these are the people that taught their later generation. And if anyone made any changes, they would have caught it. So yeah, this is a very unreasonable and very laughable objection. But some Islamophobes makes it and they think that somehow it's acceptable. It's not acceptable. On top of it, this is also a logical fallacy known as the genetic fallacy. So in case you guys don't know, genetic fallacy is basically a logical fallacy where basically you dismiss evidence or an argument simply based on where it comes from, right? Like for example, let's say that a scientist, an atheist scientist, comes to me and says that, there's this new disease that has breakout, and we should take vaccines for it, right? And I say to my family members, but this scientist, he's like an atheist, right? Why should I trust him? He's probably lying, right? And based on this, you don't take like the vaccine, right? But obviously this is fallacious, because just because he's like an atheist doesn't mean he's a liar. Same way, just because these are Muslim witnesses that are saying that these events happen doesn't mean they're lying, okay? Because the thing is that whether it's philosophy, science, or just logic in general, when you make an assumption that isn't enough to dismiss something, you actually have to prove that something is not reliable. You cannot just simply assume it. For example, even if you don't like the Muslims or think that the Muslims are biased, it still doesn't follow that just because they may be biased, that therefore they're lying. Okay? It doesn't follow. That's actually a fallacy. Okay, so this is why you cannot say that just because they're Muslim, therefore they're lying. If you claim that they're lying, you actually have to prove it. And there's no, and in order to prove it, you need evidence for it, right? But there's no evidence for it. That's the thing. And without evidence, you cannot say that these are all lies or whatever. So yeah, it's a bad argument. And so I'm hoping that if you're a non-Muslim and if you're like reasonable, you will not make this type of like bad argumentation, because Muslims will not take it seriously, because it's a bad argument. So yeah, hopefully I have explained properly why this is a bad argument or bad objection to this type of historical arguments. But I digress. So yeah, and also if we go by this logic, then we Muslims can also like pick and choose which history we want to accept, right? I mean, like, we can simply reject like the Christian history, we can reject the Hindu history, right? Hopefully this video, if you're non-Muslim, this video was a good reason for you to see that Quran is, maybe Quran has divine origins, right? So hopefully this gives you a good reason to accept Islam. And if not, then I have more videos planned. Hopefully those, when you collect all those arguments together, hopefully they will be strong enough to convince you that Islam is the truth. Because we do have other evidences as well, because there are also many evidences of many natural things that were not known at the time of the Prophet, that the Quran talks about, and that also proves that the divine source of the Quran, right? And inshallah I'll talk about it more in my next video of this series of why Quran is the word of God. So inshallah I'll see you guys next time, inshallah. Stay tuned for that. And inshallah my next video will be on Abdullah Samir, Mr. Solid Rockman. So stay tuned for that as well. And yeah, with this I want to end this video. Thank you guys for watching. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.